I do believe that my grandfather has the answer to that question. He had to do 3 years of mandatory military service in Yugoslavia, and he always told me that he loved the army life. It didn't strike me until a couple years ago to sit down and ask him, if he loved the army so much, why did he go back to farming in the village? Because, Matthew, you cannot get promoted unless you join the party, that is the Communist Party. Well, then you were an ambitious man, grandfather, why didn't you join the party? Because, Matthew, if you are in the party and they say this is black, he was pointing at his white tablecloth, then you have to say it is black, even though it is white. English is my grandfather's 5th language. I promise he has never read George Orwell's 1984. But this is exactly the 2 + 2 = 5 scene. I think about this scene a lot when I am told that men can get pregnant. When the truth becomes illegal, everything breaks. If you can't say what's wrong with the tractor, or the levy, or the hospital, or the passport office, you can never fix it, and it will stay broken. So not willing to give up on speaking the truth, my grandfather went back to the village. After a few years, though, the farms were all socialized, and eventually the starvation got so bad they had to make a break for it. Now, I have stories of our healthcare system and universities going back 13 years ago and going up all the way to last fall, when my bleeding postpartum wife spent 6 hours cradling a 2-day-old baby in the emergency room while not being seen by a physician. When I told the triage nurse I was going to take my wife to another hospital in the next town over, he said, "That would be great, thank you. There is no place for her here." If you go to one of our ERs and get treated like cattle, like my wife was at that time, you have no recourse. They would be really delighted if you took your business elsewhere. When farming is socialized, you get bread lines, and people died of starvation while standing in Soviet bread lines. When healthcare is socialized, you get lines in the ER, and I promise you people have died and are dying in waiting rooms, in emergency rooms across this country right now. You might think that I'm being overwrought and seeing the ghost of communism where it does not exist. However, I would note that we just spent 10 years with a prime minister who, when asked which government in the world he most admired, stated the basic dictatorship of the Communist Chinese Party. A prime minister who released a statement lionizing brutal communist dictator Fidel Castro when he died. A prime minister whose answer to every social problem, dental care, child care, pharmacare, school lunch, climate change, what have you, was always more socialism, more central planning, more top-down pronouncements, less freedom to make choices for yourself and your family. The zenith of all this top-down control came during the pandemic. The members opposite went full communism. They locked Canadians down in their homes. They ruined weddings, funerals, Easters, proms, and Christmases. They closed the borders. They kept mothers from children and brothers from sisters. They deprived this house of its ancient rights. They spent $600 billion of taxpayer money with no budget, doubled our national debt to pay healthy 16-year-olds to sit in their basement. Then, as now, they did all this in the name of crisis management. Physicians, professors, and journalists who spoke out against these abuses were hunted down. They had their licenses and their jobs threatened. I know this because it happened to me. At Queen's University, where I taught, Jane Philpott herself, one of the only 2 cabinet ministers to speak truth to Justin Trudeau's power, informed me in her dean's office that the reason the administration had to harass me was that I criticized the government. That is a direct quote. Of course, the Prime Minister and his commissars were immune from all of this. He could attend gatherings of greater than 5 if it suited his political purposes, like a George Floyd protest in Ottawa, and he did. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals claimed unto themselves the power to censor the news, to violate free speech in the name of fighting misinformation, while they themselves promoted misinformation. They gave luxurious contracts to their friends in academia to promote their misinformation. They gave hundreds of millions of dollars to mainstream media to promote government narratives. These 3 institutions, government, media, and the academy, have important roles in society to regulate each other. But under the federal government's bribery scheme, they have ended up, like the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, out to sea, stewing in each other's bathwater. When ordinary, everyday Canadians came here to Ottawa complaining that their charter rights to bodily autonomy, assembly, and free movement were being violated, every member of the Liberal caucus voted to trample their rights further. They violated Section 2 and Section 8 of the Charter in imposing the Emergencies Measures Act. It is not me saying that, but Justice Mosley of the Federal Court. They trampled on the charter rights they claimed to revere, and then they laughed about it. The current Minister of Transport, in particular, laughed about it, Mr. Speaker. If we cannot speak truth to their power, everything will continue to break. And that is why I had to come here, Mr. Speaker. I refuse to be a cog in their broken machine. I hope it is the case that this darkness left with the former Prime Minister, and I beseech the new Prime Minister to turn to the light, to defend those values enshrined in our anthem, truth, strength, and freedom. I read his book, Mr. Speaker. The book was called Values, and freedom, I'm sorry to say, is not among those therein discussed. The repackaging of their socialist plans in bankers' socks might fool some of the people some of the time, but I will tell you who it is not fooling. It is not fooling the multicultural communities in Kitchener South Hespeler, the Romanians, Albanians, Polish, Ukrainians, Serbians, Croatians, Lithuanians, Venezuelans, Chinese, Somalis, and Ethiopians with lived experience of socialism who know what they are seeing and don't like it and sent me here. They came here for freedom, not just any freedom, but our specific embodied Canadian freedoms. These freedoms are ours, but they are not merely ours, and they are certainly not ours to discard. They were fought for at Runnymede and encoded in the Magna Carta. They were fought for in the English Civil Wars, the Glorious Revolution, and enshrined in the Declaration of Right. They were fought for in the World Wars and enacted in Diefenbaker's Bill of Rights. They were fought for by both my grandfathers, by all of our grandparents, and embodied in all of us here. So the answer to the question of why I came here, I'm here to speak truth to power on behalf of the people of Kitchener-South Hespeler. I will be happy to go back to being a physician and professor once I can practice in truth and freedom again, once we can all live in truth and freedom again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may God keep our land glorious and free.